PCGD Sunday PowerCat Game Day Postgame. Corey Dean, John Kurtz, Cole Manbeck. You get an hour extra of 2020 today, and everything fell back a little bit yesterday as well. Whatever puns you want to throw in for Halloween or all of that stuff, it seems like K-State manages to always leave a little bit unhappy lately from West Virginia, and you guys talked about it both on PowerCat Game Day before the game, but K-State has seemed to kind of have a weird go every time they play West Virginia, and yesterday was no different. Turnovers, couldn't quite get the offense going. And John, this one seemed like at the end of the first quarter, you were probably in a good spot, you felt like, with it only being 3-3, but man, the wheels really came off in the second quarter. K-State was really never challenging to win this game.
Yeah, I'm about done with West Virginia, having lost to them 5 years in a row. It felt to me a lot like a game where K-State's, I'm going to borrow a phrase from the Solid Verbal here, but like a luck runs out kind of a game, which I don't mean to say that K-State has been lucky necessarily in winning the 4 games that they did in the Big 12, but there were a lot of things that they were able to mask, and it felt like they were using a lot of duct tape and paper clips to get by with some of this stuff, and all of that just came unhinged, kind of a perfect storm at West Virginia. I mean, I think first things first, you had the tragedy that the team dealt with this week with a former teammate of theirs finding out about his suicide on Thursday, I believe that was. So really late in the week. And Harry Trotter talked about after the game how those guys had real heavy hearts as far as that was concerned. You didn't have AJ Parker, basically your best defender, defensive player out there. So that really hurt. I think Deuce Vaughn is banged up and battling through some stuff right now. And so I don't think he was as effective or available as he would have been normally. And then Briley Moore, your only other offensive weapon, gets hurt during the game. And Will Howard was going up against the best defense he had faced. And Cole's done a lot of good research on the specific numbers of defenses K-State's faced this year and how much of a step up West Virginia was. So just felt to me like a perfect storm of all of that coming together, and makes the final score of that game obviously look pretty bad and look pretty rough. And it's easy to get really down about it. I'm certainly not packing up hope on the rest of the season, especially after watching Oklahoma State lose and all that. But definitely for a day, it was a lot of the flaws that you knew were there, really getting exposed when they hadn't been the last few weeks.
Yeah, it all kind of hit at once in one game, and you felt like K-State might be due for a clunker like that. And the bottom line is they've been so reliant on their defense and special teams to win these games so far, and the schedule outside of OU has been relatively light, and now they're getting into the harder part of their schedule. But their offense hasn't been great by any means this season, especially after Skylar Thompson went down against Texas Tech, and so. Going up against a defense like West Virginia, which is far superior to anybody K-State has faced, made it certainly a bigger challenge. And if you look at the numbers, K-State hadn't faced a top 50 defense yet this year. The best defense they played was TCU at number 52 in terms of points per drive. West Virginia was at number 16 going into that game, and they had a stout defensive line. So you knew K-State, which has struggled to run the football, would probably struggle to run the football again against West Virginia, be more reliant on the passing game. And, the very first series of the game, K-State came out and threw it 3 straight times, which was a little bit surprising to me, but they couldn't get the running game going. They really couldn't get anything going on offense. And I thought the game was lost really in that first quarter when K-State had the ball at the 2-yard line, chance to go up 7-0, first and goal, can't punch it in, end up settling for a field goal. And then 2 consecutive drives after that, K-State has starting field position at the West Virginia 36-yard line, doesn't move the ball at all, misses a long field goal. And then the next drive, they get the ball at the West Virginia 47 to start the drive, end up having to, I believe they threw an interception on that drive. And so you squandered 3 scoring opportunities, only coming away with 3 points, where you really need to come away from that with at least 14, 17 points. And I felt like if K-State got up early, maybe they play with a little more confidence, put some pressure on West Virginia, but West Virginia started feeling themselves, got in a groove in that second quarter, and kind of just snowballed on K-State. And I think kind of sucked the air out of K-State's defense, because they held strong the first few drives of that game, but they continued to repeatedly get put out on the field. I think K-State had 5 drives where they had 18 combined plays out of the 6 series in the first half where they were on the field. So defense was playing a lot of snaps, and I think it eventually wore them down and they snapped.
So, John, after the game, I thought it was interesting that Coach Kleiman said, kind of specifically alluding to what Cole said, at 10-3, things really kind of started to tip a little bit on the sideline, which I thought was pretty revealing of Coach to say that. We've talked a lot this year about how young the team is and how they have a lot of guys that are, really getting reps for the first time. is this a time that probably maybe showed that more than anything, just because you couldn't get any of the spark plays that you've been able to get in earlier games? You're blocking kicks or returning punts or throwing some kind of big chunk play with deuce or something like that. And none of that really happened in the first half, short of that touchdown drive right before halftime.
Yeah, I mean, it was a game where like losing or winning in the margins is something K-State has been doing a lot. And they weren't able to do that like at all. You know, I mean, special teams had the one return that they popped, but then they didn't take advantage of it. And, you know, one guy not totally wiping someone out on the block was the difference between that going to the 49-yard line and being a touchdown from Malik Knowles. So just didn't quite have that. Turnovers, you know, were a huge thing. Like all of a sudden you have 3 turnovers. And I know West Virginia had 1 turnover late, but for all intents and purposes, it was -3 in turnover margin in the game. And that's another thing that's an absolute killer. And yeah, I just think like the personnel issues were so exposed on offense. Like I thought Kellis spelled it out pretty well when he tweeted at one point, like, hey, if you ever wondered what K-State's offense would look like without Deuce Vaughn and Briley Moore, this is it. And then on top of that, Skylar Thompson too. That is, you know, this was an offense that nobody was really screaming from the mountaintops at the beginning of the year, like, hey, this personnel is great. There's a lot of depth of quality talent here. We knew it was pretty thin with that. And that was, you know, before seeing that Briley and Deuce would be the guys really carrying the load. And then once they go away, man, there's not enough depth there when you're trying to throw deep balls to Seth Porter. I mean, nothing against him, but that's just a tough ask, you know, that's a tough ask. He's not a guy with a bunch of size to be coming up with jump balls down the field. So they're just tough situations that the team's in personnel wise. The roster, you know, just exposed how much work the roster still needs big picture, I think.
Yeah, it's a combination of a little bit of a shortcoming of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and then some inexperience as well at key positions like the offensive line. And, you know, I get back to the inability to run the football. I mean, in this game, they had 41 yards on 23 carries, so under 2 yards per carry. And if you go through the Kleiman area since he got here, we know the running game is a huge staple of this offense. They've had 10 games now where they've averaged less than 4 yards per carry out of the 19 games that they've been in the Kleiman era. So, you know, that's not going to cut it. This year alone, they've had 3 games, 3 out of their 6, where they've averaged less than 3 yards per carry. You can't establish that running game with this offense, and you got a true freshman quarterback out there without a lot of weapons at the receiver position. You're just not going to scare defenses. And, you know, West Virginia could either stack the box if they wanted, or they could play tight man coverage because they're not worried about you beating them deep too often with a true freshman quarterback. There were times where they only rushed 2 guys even. They dropped 9 back into coverage to try and force Will Howard into making a decision with guys covered pretty tightly. And K-State's receivers certainly weren't creating a lot of separation outside of the Malik Knowles touchdown right before halftime. And so there's this lack of explosiveness on the offensive side of the ball. Losing Joaquin Gill hurts as well because you lose another experienced receiver, which leads to guys that you probably didn't expect to have to play at that position ending up out on the field. And so it's definitely a concern. It's a concern moving forward because you play 3 more really good defenses here down the stretch. And Texas is getting a little bit better on defense, I think. Not great by any means, but Baylor coming into yesterday was number 22 in points per drive. They've got Iowa State, which is number 29. And the best defense they're going to play is this next weekend against Oklahoma State, which coming into yesterday was ranked 8th in the country in points per drive allowed. So it's only going to get harder. And so K-State's offense is going to have to figure out a way to make it work. And really it comes down to they can't turn the ball over because they just can't put their defense in bad positions because it just kind of snowballs when that happens.
So for a freshman quarterback, 2 early picks is kind of worst case scenario for confidence, and it just kind of puts you a little bit too far behind, and then especially once the score really got flipped in the second quarter. But when you talk about Will Howard and kind of as Cole mentions with Okie Light next week, who by all means should have beat Texas yesterday. They dominate everywhere but the scoreboard and somehow dropped that one. Too many turnovers for the Pokes yesterday. But you know they're going to come after you. You know they're going to try to force tempo on offense, and they're going to blitz on defense. Where are the opportunities for Will Howard, who I think early on everyone would say exceeded expectations, but this was the time he really looked like a freshman yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, well, let me start by just tackling like the West Virginia game. I think a lot of that is a product of the environment around him and just him being asked to do too much at this point in his career. You know, I mean, that like Will Howard has handled himself really well, and I still think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and he still does show some good things. but that's a really good defense. It's one that K-State has always seemed to struggle against at West Virginia. Like no K-State quarterback has really been able to solve that very well. And so you just saw a guy that, the broadcast pointed out like a year ago at this point in time was like playing in the sectionals in Pennsylvania high school football. Like that's quite a big jump up, especially not being thrown into an offense where you have a bunch of ready-made playmakers. So I don't think it's something where you should get too far down on Will Howard. If you want to get down on, hey, K-State probably doesn't have a shot to legitimately compete for a Big 12 title with him at quarterback this year, I think that's a fair takeaway, from what we saw. But I don't think it's like, hey, Will Howard isn't a good quarterback. As far as it relates to next week, I mean, be honest, like just thinking about it on paper, there's not a whole lot I can say that would be super encouraging about what K-State's going to face this upcoming game as opposed to last week. It's a statistically better defense. It's one that at least I would believe in being more talented in general in Oklahoma State, and one that I would have said going into Saturday, I definitely believe in more than West Virginia. So it's going to be really tough, and who knows what Briley Moore's status is going to be. I mean, Kleiman said after the game, basically his back was like tightening up, but didn't know how severe that was going to be. Who knows if Deuce will be healthier. So on paper, I don't have a whole heck of a lot to tell you, like, hey, this should be better. The only thing I will say, and this goes for generalities too, like just with the season, this coaching staff has always found a way over the last 2 years since they've been here when things look really bleak, in particular offensively, to, squeeze some blood out of a turnip, so to speak, and make something happen with the offense. Like last year after Baylor and Oklahoma State, Malik Knowles is getting hurt. He looked like the only playmaker they had. The running backs are having trouble staying healthy. You're like, how are they ever going to move the ball on anybody in the Big 12 enough to win games? And they ripped off 3 straight and beat Oklahoma. At the beginning of this year, it was almost more defense against Arkansas State, but you're thinking, man, the defense really did not look good. How are they going to stop anybody? They go to Oklahoma, lose all these defensive backs, and then all of a sudden beat the Sooners. So, like, this coaching staff knows what they're doing. They're able to find ways to win with lesser talent. They're able to find ways to make things look better, and I would anticipate K-State looks a lot better than they did this Saturday against West Virginia when they play Oklahoma State. I don't know that means a win. In fact, I doubt that means a win, but I think that they will look and play better.
To John's point, if you go back to 2016 against West Virginia, K-State's offense just doesn't put up a lot of points against the Mountaineers. 2016, they scored 16 points in a loss there. Then 17, they scored 23. 2018, they scored 6. Last year, 20. This year, 10. 30 points against Neil Brown's defenses in 8 quarters of football the last 2 years. They just, no matter the defensive coordinator, they went through Tony Gibson, Vic Koenning, Blake Seiler, and this year, new D coordinator as well after Vic Koenning moved on and still can't move the football. So it's just they've had troubles against West Virginia for whatever reason. And you couple that when you throw a true freshman quarterback in there with an inexperienced offensive line and inability to run the football and a lack of weapons at the skill positions, and you're going to run into problems. And so I don't know how they get better for this Oklahoma State game and are able to attack the OSU defense, because to your point, John, they're one of the best teams or to your point, Corey, actually, they're one of the best teams in the country in getting after the quarterback. They bring heat and pressure all the time. They force a lot of tackles for loss. They get to the quarterback with just a standard 4-man rush sometimes. So it's going to be really hard. And they have good corners. And you look at the game yesterday, you mentioned, Corey, that they had no business winning that game, Texas, that is. Oklahoma State outgained them by almost 300 yards of offense. They had 35 first downs to 18 of Texas. They held the Texas offense in check almost the entire game. It was really a fluke win for Texas. They relied on 4 turnovers of Oklahoma State's mistakes. Actually, I think they ended up with 5 to get that victory. And so felt like Oklahoma State just kind of gave that game away with being careless with the football in a game they really dominated. I think if you want to look at it optimistically, the one thing K-State might have here is, yesterday Oklahoma State had a lot of guys get banged up. They had guys dropping left and right. Spencer Sanders got hit a lot of times as well, especially late in that game. He's probably feeling pretty sore today. And then it's a sandwich game for Oklahoma State. So they're coming off a big game against Texas. It's a tough loss. And then they've got Oklahoma. They got Bedlam after this K-State game the very following weekend. So do you maybe catch them looking ahead? I mean, I think you got an opportunity there, but this is a game where K-State is going to have to be flawless on special teams, create some big plays there, and then defensively, they're going to have to be really good. I mean, and I think they have the cornerback play to slow down a Tylan Wallace potentially, which is easier said than done. And Chuba Hubbard in the running game hasn't been great this year, and Oklahoma State's line has been beat up as well. So, I mean, there is, I'd say, a chance, but it's going to be K-State's defense and special teams will have to be perfect.
So as you look around the Big 12, I mean, yesterday was interesting. It kind of seems that it's in full anybody but Kansas mode on any given Saturday, kind of. I mean, holy cow, did K-State get Oklahoma at the right time? Because yesterday they were ridiculous against Texas Tech. They put up, 48 in the first half, which is unreal. So they seem to be coming along at the same time. Texas gets a surprising win. Iowa State takes care of business as expected against KU. But the top portion of the league, I mean, any of those two, would you be surprised at all for the Big 12 championship game at the end of the year?
Man, I mean, yeah, between I would say like Iowa State, Oklahoma, outside chance, Texas, K-State, like all teams that are in the mix for that right now. I mean, that was the thing that we were having a debate in our group text last night. Do you root for Texas or do you root for Oklahoma State? I think obviously the pull for Texas there would be just to muddy everything up and make everything at the top of the league look like a mess, which is not good for the Big 12's college football playoff chances, but I mean, it is theoretically good for K-State's Big 12 title chances. I would definitely say watch out for Oklahoma. I mean, I've been saying it for a couple of weeks. It felt like that was going to be a galvanizing win that they had, especially the way that it happened against Texas. And they have a lot of new parts that were trying to come together this year and get all that figured out. And boy, they sure seem like they are starting to get it figured out. So they're going to be there lurking. I'm not sure Oklahoma is losing the rest of the year, to be honest. So I would definitely watch out for them. And much as I like to rip on Iowa State, I wouldn't totally count them out either, because they're very much still in the mix in their schedule. They have a fairly favorable schedule the rest of the way. So, man, I mean, that is one thing you can say, as disappointing as the loss was for K-State yesterday. Everything at the top of the league is still so muddied up and crazy. K-State's still going to be playing meaningful games here for the next 2 weeks for sure, with Oklahoma State and Iowa State, like games that will matter in the conference title race, which is something that is nice to say about just year two in the Chris Kleiman era in November.
I think if I'm doing the math right here, John, I think Oklahoma really does control its own destiny to get to the Big 12 title. You know, they're sitting here with 2 losses, but if they went out, they would hand Oklahoma State a second loss and then own the tiebreaker over them. And K-State and Iowa State play each other. So one of those teams is going to get a second loss. I guess K-State or Iowa State would have to lose a third game potentially. There's a good chance that could happen. Certainly, I think Oklahoma has a better than 50% chance now to get to the Big 12 title just because of how electric they're playing, especially on the offensive side of the football. They got some guys back from suspension that looked really good. Ramondre Stevenson at running back. So, yeah, they're rolling now, and Lincoln Riley's got them moving. Yeah, if you're K-State, your best chance, I think you've got a realistic shot to still get to Arlington, but you would have to split one of these next 2 games. You got to beat either Oklahoma State or Iowa State, so you own the tiebreaker over one of those 2 schools. And then obviously, if Texas is still in play at the end, you need to beat them as well. You could get in at 7-2 if you split between Oklahoma State and Iowa State and then went out. But it's certainly going to be a hard road. And we talked, the defenses they're going to be playing, the talent they're going to be playing is better than anything they'd seen except for Oklahoma and then the West Virginia's defense yesterday. So they've got a tough road ahead. I think Oklahoma State, I don't know. I mean, it's really muddied up now. I think Oklahoma State, Iowa State both have a good shot to get there. And I think Oklahoma will get there, honestly, because of the way they're playing right now.
Well, as we get ready to finish things up, Cole's already geared up for pregame, as you can see. Are you laying 20 to take the Chiefs today against the worst team in the NFL, your New York Jets?
Far too many points for my blood, based on, some backdoor covers here. Like, I understand the Jets are going to be terrible, but like, there's just too much variance in like what the Chiefs may be doing personnel wise, and just trying to make sure that you get in and get out alive, just in one piece with your W today against the Jets. So I'm not somebody that puts my actual hard-earned money on these things, but I do pay a lot of attention to it. That to me, Cole, you're more in tune with this than I am, but to me just screams like something that I would not be doing at all.
Yeah, I don't usually touch lines nearly that large, but if I had to, I would pick the Chiefs. And, the reason being, I watched the Jets get shut down by the Dolphins a couple weeks ago, 24-0. Granted, Joe Flacco was the quarterback in that game, but The Jets have ruled out Rashad Perryman at receiver and Jamison Crowder at receiver. So their top receivers are out for this game. Their offensive line is not good. I think Le'Veon Bell is it's a revenge game for him. I think he's going to play hungry. I think K-State or the Chiefs use him a lot. I've inserted Le'Veon Bell into 2 of my fantasy lineups today, expecting him to get a lot of touches because of the revenge factor. And so that reason being, the Jets are just so bad. Normally, a 20-point spread in an NFL game is so incredibly rare, but they are so bad that I think I would lay the 20 with the Chiefs and expect them to cover. But there could be a backdoor cover, like John mentioned. That's the scary thing with it. So, but yeah, should be an easy one. Schedule actually lightens up significantly for the Chiefs. I think I saw someone tweet out that they might have the easiest schedule in the NFL the rest of the way. They've got the Buccaneers and Saints on the road still, but outside of that, it's a very winnable schedule.
Well, the next highest spread this week in the NFL is the Bucs and the Giants. And the Bucs are getting 12.5 against the Giants. So football, not good in New York right now. Not good.
Yeah. The worst thing about today is the Chiefs play in the same window as the Ravens Steelers. So we won't get to watch that game because that'll be a CBS game as well. And so, it's too bad that game hasn't been moved to 3:30.
Just kick Seahawks Niners later. That's always going to be fun.
Bad news for the Jets all around, man. Trevor Lawrence is going to be out next week against Notre Dame, so they can't watch their hopefully future quarterback play against the Fighting Irish and what could have been the game of the year in college football. So nothing's coming up Jets these days.
Well, we will catch up next week. Cats get the Cowboys. It's going to be an interesting one at home. Not quite the stakes that I think everybody had hoped 2 weeks ago with both those teams taking losses on Saturday, but still an interesting game for K-State. And maybe a bye coming at exactly the right time for the Cats, as they'll get a chance to regroup a little bit before closing down the end of the season. Gentlemen, enjoy your Sunday. Enjoy your pregame tailgate from home, and we'll catch you next Sunday.
Thanks, Corey.
Sounds good.